Hi, I am here with Chip Simmons, Republican candidate for Escambia County Sheriff. I'm Dusty Clements with Respective Podcast. Chief, how are you doing?
I'm good. Good to be here.
Good to see you. Of all years you had picked to run for sheriff, you had picked the golden year to do that.
2020 is going to go down as a crazy year, isn't it?
I can only imagine what you have gone through with this, but we are trying to keep our distance from each other and using precautions without wearing masks on video, so we're trying to do our part. So Chief, I was hoping we could just talk today and I could just kind of focus a little bit more on just you as a person instead of a candidate, so people can get to know you. So you grew up in Pensacola, right?
I wasn't born in Pensacola. I was born on a Navy base in Keflavik, Iceland.
Okay.
Obviously, my father was in the Navy, but soon thereafter, we moved here to Pensacola. So I've been here for my lifetime. I went to elementary school, Bellevue Elementary, Bellevue Middle, and then Pine Forest High School. So I have been here a long time. Yeah.
That's so you were one of my rivals there from Escambia when I was at Escambia then. So
At Pine Forest and Escambia, we had some quality games.
yes,
Sure did.
sure did. So do you have siblings?
Yes, I'm the second born. I have an older brother, a younger brother, and then a younger sister. So we always, obviously, my little brother and my little sister were born and raised here. So again, we've been here for over 50 years.
Now, are any of your siblings in law enforcement or any kind of law enforcement activities?
My younger brother was. He is 3
Okay.
years my junior, and he has just recently retired from the Escambia County Sheriff's Office. He retired as a captain at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office. For most of our careers, I had been with the police department for 30 years or 29 years, and then he spent that much time and more at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office.
So both of you.
Both of us, yeah. My older brother's in the ministry,
Oh,
and my younger sister's in banking. So we have
That's-
roots in Escambia
You
County.
certainly do.
Yeah.
You certainly do. So, was there anyone growing up? What made you kind of think about law enforcement? Did you think about it as a kid or a teenager? Or?
I think that when you grow up and your father wears a uniform, whether it is law enforcement, firefighting, the military, I think that as a kid you look at that and you think that's something that I might want to try. And growing up, I always thought that I can defend, that someone gets a bully, or I would defend the people that need defending, that can't take care of themselves. And I always found myself in that situation. So I thought, law enforcement would be a great way, a great avenue, a great profession so that I could do that. And plus, it seemed like an exciting career. It seemed like a career that I can actually contribute to my community, and that's what led me into law enforcement.
That's really great. It's and especially seeing your career kind of blossom as it has. I mean, it's just amazing that at a young age you decided to get into it and stay with it. Because you see a lot of more turnover than people realize in law enforcement nowadays.
Yeah, you talk a little bit about, as an early age, I started at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office. Some people don't realize it. My first 2 years, I was a corrections officer, and I was a corrections officer because I was in a motorcycle accident. We talked a little bit about motorcycles earlier, and I broke my jaw, my arm, my leg, and I couldn't go to rookie school or to the police academy. So they put me at the jail, working as a corrections officer, and then 2 years later, I went to the Pensacola Police Department. When I started, I wasn't even old enough to buy ammo for the guns that I was issued. They had issued those to me. Things have changed now. You have to be 21 to get in those types of endeavors. But back in the mid '80s, you could be hired before you turned 21, and I did.
Yeah, when I started in law enforcement in Alabama, there was a guy I worked with that he was hired at 19. And they changed the law to 21, and so he was kind of in limbo for a couple of years there, but still working at the department as an officer. So,
well, I would tell you that you learn a lot working in corrections.
sure.
I spent 2 years there. I was 19 years old, 20 years old, and I was in the same jail that we have now. And you learn a lot about how to treat people, how to respect people, and how not to be taken advantage of. So it's a rewarding experience for me. I think it certainly helped me moving forward in my law enforcement career.
So what now it was the new jail that we have now in Escambia County, was it the same one? Or
It was the
same new jail, but yeah.
The big jail, 7 years, they called it grade school, I think.
Right.
It was actually the new jail at the time.
Right.
And so we were there, but they had what is called an annex, where the Scheme County Sheriff's Office is now. There was where they housed the female prisoners. So it was called the annex at the time, and there was also the sheriff's office. So it was. I've been in and out of that the big jail over there since I was been and I've been a correctional officer. It's old.
So you've certainly seen that. You've seen all kinds of things going with the jail over the years. So right now, the commissioners have oversight over the jail, correct?
That's correct.
Do you anticipate that coming back to the sheriff's department, or would you want that to come back to the sheriff's department?
I think if you look at it from a community standpoint, from a citizen standpoint, and taxpayer standpoint, I believe that the jail should be run by the sheriff. There are efficiencies to be had. You can, with training and with employment and HR, you can do a lot more under one administration than I think you can under two.
Sure.
That being the case, it's not up to the sheriff. The Board of County Commissioners is responsible for the jail. And if they want to engage with the sheriff and make the sheriff the chief corrections officer, then obviously I'd be willing to have those conversations, because I do believe that it works better under the sheriff. But again, that's not up to the sheriff. That would be up to the Board of County Commissioners.
You know, I grew up here and moved away, but I still followed the news here. And the jail was kind of one of those areas that I would constantly see news articles, kind of a contentious situation, it seemed like, with budget and who's going to see it. And then, of course, we had the unfortunate accident with the hurricane, to go on there. So it certainly seems like it'd be a lot to take on, but I totally see your point with a single administration over all of it.
Well, and as you mentioned, there was a flood, and then obviously the jail explosion. And I wasn't there at the time. I was a police chief at the time. I got a phone call, and because we had a couple of our police cars in the jail, they had just booked some prisoners. So obviously we were all concerned about everyone that was in the jail. Obviously the deputies that were there, the corrections officers, the police officers, and the inmates, obviously. So we did what we could to help them maintain a secure facility during that horrible time period.
So, you talk about you were the police chief, but you started out as a cadet over there at Pensacola PD.
Actually, I wasn't a cadet. I went as a corrections officer. I chose that route, and then I went to Pensacola Police Department in 1986.
So you got to go straight in as an officer.
Right. I was going straight in as a rookie police officer. I was only 22, so I still wasn't that old back then, but I was finally old enough to buy my own bullets and that sort of thing for the gun. So everyone that is hired at the Pensacola Police Department at the time, and I'm assuming that's still the case, you go straight to uniform patrol, where you answer calls for service. You wear we used to have the light blue shirts and the dark pants before we moved to more of a darker blue. So yeah, I spent my first couple of years in uniform patrol, and then you move around. You move to a specialized unit. I moved to what we call the tactical unit, which is a plainclothes operation, not undercover, but it was a plainclothes operation, mostly anti-burglary, anti-robbery type of operation. I then moved to as an investigator or detective. So handling, we did the follow-up on reported crimes and try to solve them, whether it's, whatever's reported, obviously, burglaries, robberies, persons crimes and property crimes. And then I went to where I spent the majority of my time. I had a brief stint as a field training officer. And then I went to the narcotics unit, where I spent the majority of my police officer career.
So you very much stayed involved in operations, the operational component the entire time. And of course you go up in the rank during that time. So when you're a supervisor, when you finally got to a supervisor, especially over, most folks that I would imagine that are in some kind of special operations unit are type A personalities, very. So were there challenges with that? How did you learn a lot of lessons from being a supervisor plus being involved?
I think when you go through a career in any endeavor that you choose, you learn a lot from the people that you work for.
Sure.
So that when you get in a position of authority, you can take those lessons and hopefully use those in a positive way. I spent 8 years as a narcotic investigator. I got promoted to sergeant, and then when you get promoted, you go to uniform patrol again. You revert right back to the uniform patrol, which is the heart and soul, the backbone, if you will, of any law enforcement agency. And then after a period of time in patrol, I go back to narcotics. So now I'm supervising some of the people that are still there that I had been working with a year prior to that. So you do learn you learn that, hey, things are different now. I'm in charge of this operation. And in narcotics, you're working in the evening shift or a night shift, and you don't have. I didn't have a lieutenant working at night with me. The buck stopped with me,
Right.
and we were doing some high risk search warrants. We were doing some some controlled buys, some controlled deliveries. We were doing a lot of things with some other agencies, whether it is task force operations that we had, or working with the SWAT team, which I was also a part of. So that there's some kind of hairy situations that you come upon, but through your training and through your experience, you learn to to settle down, and you learn to deal with these things as they come up, and preparedness is the key.
Right. Now, the whole time you're doing all this, the high stress job of this, you have a family.
Right.
And you go back to school, correct?
Right. And when I was a narcotics officer, again working nights, but you also work. I was also part of a OCDF, or Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, with DEA and FDLE and other agencies. So we work a lot of overtime. But I also knew that if I wanted to advance, if I wanted to make the most of my career, that I needed to get an education. So I went back and I got my associate's, my bachelor's, and then my master's degree while I was in working in narcotics, so that I could continue to have to have an opportunity to be not just a sergeant, but also be a lieutenant. And then at the time, because I still consider myself young, I wanted to be a captain, and maybe even more. But at the time, like you said, you're right. I've got a wife at home. I've got a newborn. I've got a 2 or 3 year old. I remember many times going home late at night or early in the morning, really, and and checking on my my small I have 2 boys.
Mm-hmm.
Checking my 2 boys. My wife's at work, and all these things are working out the best that we can. We're a young couple. We're putting the hours in. We're putting the work in, and we're continuing to move forward both of our careers.
So you finish school, you have your master's, and at this point you pick up assistant chief?
Well, no, actually, I was in narcotics as a narcotics investigator, and I got all 3 of my degrees while I was still there. And then I got promoted at the police department. You test for promotion, so you get so much credit for being for seniority, and then you get so much credit for how you do on a promotional exam and then an oral interview. Well, I hadn't been there very long, so I really had to ace the written report, the written test, and the oral interview, and I was fortunate enough to do that. So I was promoted after 8 years, which is pretty quick. I was very fortunate, and then I go to patrol and come back to narcotics, and before I'm a lieutenant. When I make lieutenant, I stay in narcotics because that's been my expertise at this point, and that's where I was needed. Quite honestly, we had a lot of drug-related violent crime. And we see some of that now as well. Mm-hmm. And so my expertise in narcotics operations and in SWAT operations, or violent crime apprehension, kind of helped me out to be the SWAT commander and the narcotics commander at the same time. So, and that's when I actually went to the FBI National Academy. When you're a mid-level or an upper-level administrator, the FBI puts on a 3-month program that I was fortunate enough to be selected to. So I went there. And basically took some schooling from University of Virginia, which is who sponsored the program up there. So that all happened as lieutenant, and then I also became the agency's PIO, Public Information Officer.
I remember that. Yes,
Yeah.
I forgot.
So
about
for a
that.
lot of years, I was and it started as a lieutenant, and then you move to at the police department. The rank structure is lieutenant, captain, assistant chief, and police chief. So I was fortunate enough again to move from lieutenant to captain. And then rather quickly, I became the assistant chief of police, which is what you were asking about earlier. So I was the assistant chief for over 6 years before I became police chief.
And it seems like I remember you now that you say PIO. I remember seeing the news and you as the PIO, and I'd forgotten about that.
Well, during Hurricane Ivan, I was the PIO and the assistant chief, and so we were doing all these national interviews, and the face of the agency, and in many regards the face of the city was the police department. So it was either myself or Chief Mathis at the time, or the city manager Al Kobe at the time with the hurricanes and all that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, that was some pretty demanding times there with the consistent hurricanes coming through. So I'm taking it narcotics was your favorite.
It was.
Yeah.
It's a place where you can whether you're working undercover. Undercover is, I'm not sure if you ever worked undercover capacity, but you get to fool these drug dealers into thinking that you're a legitimate bad guy and you want to buy drugs or sell drugs, and that's where you really get, because it's difficult for them to go to court and saying, hey, I didn't do it, when the officer that's testifying against you is the one that sold you the drugs.
Right.
Many times it's on video or on some sort of audio recording. So it's probably the most fun that I've had, because you interact with so many different agencies. We were flying to Orlando, flying to Fort Lauderdale, flying to a number of different places, doing a lot of travel, because we were tasked with a Jamaican drug gang that we had that was operating here locally, and the individuals that I was working with on the DEA level, the Pensacola Police level, were just phenomenal, and we did a lot of great work, just some terrific work. I'm very proud of what we did.
I did some work with the 21st Judicial Drug Task Force up Mobile,
Right.
And it was pretty amazing the folks you would get to work with. At the time, I went to several schools in Memphis,
Right.
because Memphis was the hub of everything at that time. May still be, but it really was pretty active at that time, especially as far as interstate interdiction and
Right.
things like that. So you pick up police chief, and I mean, you've worked hard, you've learned a lot at this point, but
Right.
when the buck stops with you over a whole police department, that's pretty challenging.
You always think you're prepared.
Sure.
When you're a patrol officer, you think you're prepared for sergeant.
Right.
When you're a sergeant, you think you're prepared for lieutenant. But you can't never really be prepared unless you've done the job. Unless you're sitting in that desk, you hire the people, you fire the people, you discipline, you transfer. Whatever happens, the reputation of the agency is also your reputation. So, yeah, when I became the police chief, there were a couple of things that I really wanted to do. We've been a city since 1821, city of Pensacola, very historic, but we've never been accredited, which means we have never went for an accredited status, meaning we would have standardized policies, not just have the policies, but also have the proofs that we are abiding by these things. So we set about to do a 2 or 3 year accreditation process where every one of our policies, every one of our procedures, every one of the proofs that we were required to show is evaluated. And they have interviews they just pop in and will interview a police officer, then will interview a lieutenant, they'll come and interview the police chief. You actually go to the accreditation board and you defend your agency and you answer questions much like we are here. And they'll say, well, what would you do in this situation? What makes Pensacola Police Department, good or bad or indifferent? And so we worked on that, and we were able to gain, to acquire the very first accredited status at the Pensacola Police Department. And we were very proud of that. That's just the one thing that I really wanted to do, because I knew we were a professional agency, but I wanted to take that next step to prove that we are not just a good agency, but a great agency, an agency that the city of Pensacola can be proud of. But I also wanted us to be more transparent. I realized that we could do more, and so I instituted the first regional body camera program. No one pushed me into it, and quite honestly, a lot of the police officers didn't want to do it because they don't want a camera right there where everything they're doing and everything that they're saying is being recorded. But I felt like it was important. I felt like if we're going to be professional enough to be accredited, we also need to be professional enough to be transparent and to let people know we're not ashamed of what we do or how we do it. So we instituted the body camera program. The Pensacola Police Department is still the only agency, the local agency, certainly large agency to have the body cameras, and it worked out very well. We used them for the body camera footage. We used them for court process, obviously. We used them for training purposes. We critiqued our own operations, but and unfortunately we also used them for disciplinary matters because we're not perfect.
Right.
And there's some things that we can always do better for. And so those two things I combined with a lot of our engagement efforts. People may not remember, but we had the very first town hall meetings here in Pensacola. The Pensacola Police Department would go to various areas in the city of Pensacola, and we would open ourselves up. And we said, do you have any questions? Do you have any comments? Do you have any concerns? Which is basically the precursor to what these advisory committees are now, because we were using our various neighborhoods as our advisory committee. And so it worked out very well. We opened up some youth sports camps. I'm a big fan of sports. I'm a big fan of the mentoring aspect of youth sports. And so we opened those up, and we did some Christmas giveaways, and we were really in the early stages of doing these types of things. So there's a lot of things that I'm very proud of that we did at the Pensacola Police Department. Certainly some things that I'm very proud of. When I was the police chief. Oh, and we also had brought the crime rate down to historical lows. So we're very proud of where we were and the image and professionalism that we brought to the Pensacola Police Department.
That's that's the thing. My impression I've always had, growing up here, is Pensacola Police Department stood out as a bunch of professional officers. They just always seemed their uniforms, were squared away, and they carried themselves a little differently. And I've always clean cut, and it always impressed me seeing the PPD and the body cams, if I may. I'm a proponent of body cams. I also remember when we started getting dash cams in cars, and officers didn't want dash cams.
Right.
Felt like Big Brother spying on them. Do you plan on bringing those to the sheriff's office? And I mean that may be it's a lot of money for a body cam. I know that, and it could take quite a while to fully implement that. But what's your goals with that?
I think it would be hypocritical for me to say that I'm not a fan all of a sudden of body cameras.
Right.
I am certainly a fan of everything involving body cameras, the integration of the body cameras to the in-car videos, and then pushing forward. So I have every intention of establishing a body camera program at the sheriff's office and working with the Board of County Commissioners to make sure that we can afford it and make sure that they will continue to support that from year to year.
So that kind of leads me into when you retired as chief, you went over to the county. You were hired as assistant county administrator, correct?
That's correct. In the city of Pensacola, when you reach a certain point, you can enter the DROP program, the Deferred Retirement Options Plan, and then you have up to 5 years. And so, and most people do that. And so I joined the DROP program, and so almost 4 years in, I'm staring down at one more year.
Right.
And I, because I was relatively young, me and John Mathis were the youngest police chiefs in Pensacola Police Department history. So I was only 46, so I was still kind of young. I wanted to continue to work. Well, Jack Brown was the county administrator, and he says, "Hey, I could use you over here now. I'll put you as an assistant county administrator. You will be over all of public safety, over fire, corrections, EMS, facilities, and 1,200 employees."
Right.
And I, because I had a master's degree in public administration, he felt like I could do that. And so I decided to forego my last year of the drop and move over into, because I was going to be forced to leave, and I had signed my drop paperwork, so I knew I was going to leave. And I decided to go ahead and move over to county government. I had a pretty good understanding, again, as a master's degree in public administration, I had an understanding of governmental budgeting, and then as a police chief, we created our own budgets, but even as the assistant chief. So for a total of 11 years, I was in the top 2 levels at the Pensacola Police Department doing the budgets and doing the budget presentation every year with John Mathis for 6 years and then on my own for 5 years.
Right.
So when I went to the county to work as the assistant county administrator, in short order, we were having a lot of deaths in the jail. We had, I think, 6 or 7 deaths in 1 year. And so Jack Brown and I got together. We decided we needed to make a move as the chief from the chief corrections officer that we had at the time. And so who's standing? Me. I'm a former corrections officer. I'm a former certified corrections officer. And so we decided that I would take over as a chief corrections officer in addition to being the assistant county administrator. So for the last year, as a chief corrections officer, I was tasked with looking at all of our policies so that we can eliminate some of the deaths that we were having in the jail. There were suicides, and some were other than suicides. So we had to stop all of those because one death is too many.
Sure.
It does happen, but we need to make sure that we address those. So we were able to, in essence, basically stop the deaths in the jail. And then Sheriff Morgan took a look at me, and I had known Sheriff Morgan as my time as a police chief. And there's some things that they liked that we did, or that I did at the Pensacola Police Department, the cadet program, the body cameras, and some different things. And he liked, as you mentioned, the professional look of the Pensacola Police Department. And I could if I could. So much so that we put our core values on our police cars. We were so serious about them, reinforcing them. We put, I decided that let's put courtesy, integrity, and professionalism on the cars, on the business cards, in the hallway. We put them everywhere because that was the standard that we were not going to that we're going to uphold. We weren't going to settle for anything less. So Sheriff Morgan liked that, and he hired me as chief deputy over operations about 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago now, and we have really implemented the cadet program. We're starting on a number of different things too. The hope is obviously we can raise the level of professionalism at the sheriff's office as well.
Yeah, that excites me thinking about that standard over at the sheriff's office. So you leave. You're at county. So what did you learn as county administrator assistant? Was that a kind of a shock to you on certain things, or?
I think that you learn something. Again, we talked a little bit about every stage that you are in. When I was a police officer, then a sergeant lieutenant, you were judged based on your effectiveness in reducing the drugs and making arrests and how basically how good you are as an officer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate enough. I'm one of the most decorated officers in police department history. I'm one of only 10 people to get the Gold Medal of Valor at the Pensacola Police Department. So I knew the operational side. As you move forward as the assistant chief and then the police chief, you learn a lot more about, again, budgeting, about projections. You learn more about motivation. You deal with the city council. You deal with the city administration. You go to the county and you do that again. You deal with county budgets, which is $500 million.
Right.
And you learn a lot more about that and about unions and about how to, taxing authorities and this sort of thing. And again, projections.
Right.
So when I went to the sheriff's office now, I just continue with that education in that it's not just about operational skills. It's not just about even the budgeting part of it. It is about motivation of the workforce. It is about the welfare of the workforce. It is about the engagement with the community. How do you better engage with the community? How do you build the trust of the community? And these are the things that I've picked up along the way, whether it is as the sergeant of the SWAT team, whether it's as the lieutenant, whether it's as the PIO, the assistant chief, the police chief, the assistant county administrator, and now currently the chief deputy. There are a lot of things that you look back and say, we've done this before. We've dealt with something similar before. And then ultimately what you're going to look at it through the lens of common sense and decency. Is this the common sense things to do? And is it the decent thing to do? Are you doing right by your employees? Are you doing right by the residents of Escambia County?
So you have a decorated career with the city of Pensacola.
Mm-hmm.
You work your way up through the ranks. You become the police chief, and that's a career in and of itself. You go over to become the assistant county administrator, chief deputy of the sheriff's department or sheriff's office, and then you decide, I'm going to run for sheriff. So what led you to that?
Well, again, I think you get into law enforcement because you want to help. We talked a little bit about that before. You get in because you want to make a difference in your community. And I believe that Escambia County is in a situation where we need a sheriff that has the qualifications. We need a sheriff that has the proven past performance. We need a sheriff that has the vision. We need a sheriff that has done it before and that can step in from day one, and the sheriff can lead the agency towards a robust and aggressive enforcement strategy, because I've done that. And we can also at the same time have an engagement strategy that we've never seen before. So there's that vision, but there's also that again, that proven past performance that I've done it before, and we can do it again. And we, as I mentioned earlier, we can have, the memories that you and I would have growing up, the favorable memories that we've had growing up, that our kids and grandkids hopefully look back and have the same opportunities for these memories that we have, because otherwise we would be compromising on qualifications. We would be compromising on the level, the talent level, the person that we elect as sheriff. And if we compromise on that, we compromise on our safety as well. And I wasn't going to sit back and let that happen. I know what it's going to take. I know how to improve things. I know how to get us to a point where we have levels of enforcement engagement that we've never seen in Escambia County, because I've done it.
Mm-hmm.
That's important.
So even as chief deputy, I mean, you run a lot of things, but at the end of the day, you are working for the office of the sheriff. You're working for the sheriff, and it's the sheriff's office. So what do you think you would do? Not to say in contrast to the current
Right.
sheriff, but what would be your style of leadership? What would you like to implement and kind of leave your mark at the sheriff's office as sheriff?
Well, I think you have to base it upon your own experience.
Sure.
In my experience, again, narcotics investigations, SWAT operations, but also I think that the fact that I've implemented the body cameras, we did the accreditation, we moved that up, we pushed the core values of courtesy, integrity, professionalism. That's where I come from. In fact, these are the things that I myself have developed, either as the assistant chief or the police chief, and then I can move forward and move the sheriff's office in that same direction. Now, everyone that takes over an operation, whether it's law enforcement or private industry, they have their own experiences. They have their own strong suits. They have their own vision and platform. And so that's what I have to offer. I have this proven past performance. I have this vision, this platform, and I know how to get it done. And we can get it done relatively quickly. And it's not against what Sheriff Morgan has done. Sheriff Morgan has done for the past 12 years. Based upon what his experiences are,
Sure.
which is a retired military officer. But my experience is local law enforcement. My
Right.
experience is the drug-related crime, the violent crime apprehension, and that's what we need in Escambia County. But I'm optimistic. I think we can do both. We can be tough on crime, and we can be at a level of engagement that we have not seen here in Escambia County. I know that we can do it because we've done that in the past.
Yeah, I've seen the sheriff's department I always say department, I mean office, but I've seen the office just, deputies at night on a busy night just running ragged. I mean, just one call to another. So there's not a lot of proactive policing. It's a lot of response,
Right.
And I look forward to seeing some more, community oriented engagement going on at the sheriff's office. Under the current situation, the environment, political environment, and events that have occurred over the last, a lot of questions are coming up on how sheriff's offices, police departments are run. And of course, it seems to be, in some situations, a call for accountability, and then in other situations, a more radical approach is just the abolishment of law enforcement departments. I do not think they know exactly what they're asking for there, but so one of the questions that come up is training. The training of officers, everything from professionalism, being able to use verbal tactics, to just being able to de-escalate situations. How do you feel the training level is in this area with officers?
I don't think any administrator would tell you we're right where we need to be with regards to training because there's
Sure.
funding involved in
Mhm.
training. I think that we do a pretty good job with training, whether it's a sheriff's office or a Pensacola Police Department. Again, I mentioned before that we are an accredited agency, which means we borrow from other agencies and from the accreditation the division and say, okay, what are other agencies? What is the industry standard with regards to use of force, with regards to vehicle pursuits? What is everyone else doing, and what training is available through the Florida Sheriff's Association, through the International Association of Police Chiefs or Florida Police Chiefs Association, and so we do those types of things. But I don't think that you would be a quality professional administrator if you weren't always looking for ways to improve.
Mhm.
I mentioned before about the body cameras, and we got those. One of the reasons we got those cameras is for the critique and the training aspect of things, so that whenever one officer was involved in a particular situation, we can share that experience through the use of the body camera, the footage, with every officer that we have at the agency. Because not every officer is going to involve themselves in the
Right.
same type of a situation. So I think that where we are and where we're going to go and where we continue to strive to go are two very different things. So I have a very good relationship with the members of the Board of County Commission, and I think that if you can show them this is where we're going to go, what I want to do is increase the level of use of force training. I want to increase the level of less than lethal or non-lethal uses of force. And this is the training avenues that's going to get us there. This is what's going to make us the professional agency that we want to be, that you want, that our citizens expect. So I think training is a very important part of that. I don't think you can ever stop training. Again, we're obviously, if we want to be a professional agency, we have to continue to do better and better. And I think that's what makes good administrators good, that they don't just bury their head in the sand. They look at what they're doing and say, how do we do better? How can we get better today?
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't answer that question, then we need to start pushing our troops and push for different things, so that every day, every month, every year, we provide a better work product for the citizens of Escambia County.
You know, you bring up the use of force, and one of the things I'm always a proponent of is they need to understand how to use of force. They need more training. They need to be going to the gym. They need to, be rolling on mats. They need to learn that. And I've had people counter me with that, saying, you're just trying to teach them how to fight. I'm like, no, I'm trying to teach them how to resolve a situation as quickly as possible. But how can you explain to me kind of use of force as a law enforcement officer and how that's applied?
I mean, that's the big question nowadays, but it's always really been the question.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom line is this: the statute allows for only the force necessary to complete a law enforcement function. So if an individual doesn't resist, but I say you're under arrest, and they say yes sir, and they turn around and they put their hands behind their back, we put the cuffs on, and they walk to the car, how much force is used? There's actually a level of force used. There's officer's presence. There's sometimes empty hand or a guiding technique. So there are some uses of force there, but you don't hear about those. Unfortunately, not everyone complies like that.
Sure.
So you have to you're met with, as an officer, you're met with a level of resistance, and so the law enforcement officer is allowed to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thought out here that law enforcement officers can't protect themselves, and that's not true at all. You can't protect yourself, and you have a duty. Your job is to arrest this burglar or this rapist or this murder suspect. You have to do that. And sometimes it can get intimate, and sometimes it's ugly because they resist and they fight because they're fighting for their freedom. They're fighting for their life. And you're fighting to get this person, this dangerous criminal, off the street. We have an obligation as a law enforcement officer. So yeah, no matter how bad they are, you can still only use the level of force that's necessary. And what is that? Well, it depends on a lot of, the totality of the circumstance. It depends on the officer subject, how big they are, how small they are, the level of, you talked about working out and your level of, martial arts experts and that sort of thing. Am I by myself? Is there another way that I can maintain the control of the suspect and get him in the car? So that's why it's so difficult to say, well, that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad. Because it's hard to recreate that. It's easy for us to sit in a chair up in the office on Monday morning or Tuesday morning and say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You should have used, some sort of a martial arts maneuver, and he would have immediately complied. That's not the case. It does not happen. Sometimes it does, and the level of force is consistent with that. Sometimes, however, there are times when you as a law enforcement officer have to escalate your level of force. And sometimes it requires an escalation to include deadly force.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think people do understand that. But what they don't, when they see something on TV and they say, well, that doesn't look reasonable. Because sometimes I look at something and say, that doesn't seem reasonable. I think from my experience in law enforcement, I think you could have taken a different avenue. And then we start to train. We make sure that that's not where we're trained, and where do we have some deficiencies? Should we get better with that? Because we're not able to, you brought it up, we're not able to only hire those that are martial arts experts, those that can run a 4-minute mile, those that are, have a PhD in psychology and philosophy. We can't, they're not banging on our door to get in law enforcement.
Right.
What we have to do is we have to get a cross section of our community, and then we train them up. We filter a lot of the ones that we don't think will be good law enforcement officers, and the ones that we feel like have the demeanor, the physical characteristics, and the demeanor, again, that would allow them to do the job that we tasked them with.
You see two trends that always bother me. At about 10 years, you'll see good officers leave departments or leave the career. And then right at 20 years, you'll see a lot of officers take their own life, when they get to 20, 30 years. And so much of that could easily be contributed to just the stress, the stress on the job, trying to because, and I think they're human. They're just like anybody else that works a 9 to 5 job, but they deal with the worst situations in everyone else's life.
Right.
So, I know Chief Leiter announced about PTSD training or screening.
Right.
Would you implement that at the sheriff's office?
Yeah, I think that people don't understand exactly what we do.
Right.
We've been getting phone calls, and how come you don't weed out applicants that are members of the KKK? Or how come you don't weed out people that have PTSD and that show violent tendencies? We already do that. We provide, to get in law enforcement, you go through a rigorous pre-employment test to include a psychological exam. And then when you're assigned to certain locations at the sheriff's office, you have annual psychological exams. When you're involved in a traumatic experience, you go, and you get a psychological exam or assessment. Mm-hmm. We already do that. And I'm certainly a fan of continuing to do that, including allowing us to do that more so, to maybe spot checks or follow-ups. If you're involved in an officer-involved shooting, you go to, you do a psychological screening, and then we're going to have you go 90 days later to do a follow-up. Because sometimes the PTSD manifests itself at a little bit of a later time. And you talked about how difficult the job is, and sometimes, unfortunately, we have law enforcement officers that commit suicide because it's hard to deal with some of the images that they've seen and they've done. We had a recent incident on December 6th, an incident at the Pensacola NAS where we had a terrorist act. Someone just indiscriminately went inside and started shooting people. And those are images that I'll never forget because I was there. And certainly the ones that were engaging with the terrorists, they're not going to forget those sorts of things. So this is just how many people in their daily life have the opportunity, unfortunate opportunity, to go into situations like that. And then the very next call, they got to help find a lost child. Yeah. And then the very next call, they have to talk about a child abuse person. And then they have to go to an accident and they have to tell a family member that that their child was killed in a traffic crash. These are difficult, moments. These are difficult opportunities. And while it's easy to say, well, we just shake it off, because you got to do it again the next day.
Right.
And sometimes when you lay your head on that pillow, these are difficult things to kind of shake and difficult to just put it behind you and go right back to sleep. So I think that people need to understand the difficult job that law enforcement officers have every day. Because if they weren't doing it, who else is going to do that? Mm-hmm. Who's going to make those calls? Who's going to go to Pensacola NAS and confront an armed gunman? Who's going to do that? Who's going to be out there in the middle of a hurricane while everyone else is hunkered down, sheltering in place? Who's going to answer that 911 call and dispatch a call or a deputy there, knowing that person has a gun? Right. Who else is going to do that? It takes trained law enforcement, dedicated professionals to do that.
In talking about they have to carry on with their lives, when that happened on NAS Pensacola, my son and daughter-in-law are in the flight barracks right next to it, right. The housing. She's going through flight school. And it happens, they're standing outside, they hear the shots. My son runs to the daycare, which is right there, it's the same location. My son's an MMA fighter. He's not scared of too many things in life. And it freaked him out that it was just hit home with him.
Right.
That it's in a place you don't expect it. The base has always been a safe
area.
Right. Exceptional officers being stationed there. Right. And it sticks to him. We spoke about it just a few days ago, how it really kind of messed with him.
Yeah, I still have people come up to me and, because they, obviously the media rushed to the scene, and Sheriff Morgan and I was we were forced to give updates. This is what's taking place. It's the terrorist was killed, and we continue to remind him he was killed with hundreds of rounds of ammo on him. Right. The number of lives that were saved that day from the quick reactions of sheriff's deputies and the military police. I'm not sure if we could ever really fathom how many lives were saved, because again, I was there and I saw him. And this round after round was there. He was prepared to kill a lot of people.
One of the things about that incident as well that I really think you play in with that is being a PIO. I know you were kind of represented the sheriff's office in a lot of ways with the media during that event. And that's a national event where you're getting the national media aggressively wanting answers and asking questions. Um, were you surprised by any of the media there, or you already kind of experienced it?
No, I mean, no one's really experienced something like that, not
Right.
locally, because we haven't had a terrorist act like that. And was I surprised? I don't know that I was surprised. It doesn't take long. You're amazed at how long it takes the media to get there. And all of a sudden, I mean, that morning, we were still double checking, finding out, because we had 3 officers that got shot. And so we're trying to figure out how they are, have their families been notified, and then we do what we call just an impromptu news conference right outside the gate. And we get there, there's just tons of cameras. I mean, you're staring, there's some pictures in the news journal, and I'm talking, and you can just see camera after camera.
Yeah.
And it's normally the stuff you see on TV. Unfortunately, this time it hit home, and that's, again, I know we're talking about, my campaign and me, but we're really talking, I feel like it's important to give the kudos to the men and women that risk their life every day. Certainly those that did that on December 6th.
Absolutely. One of the areas of the county, the north end of the county.
Right.
It's a different style of policing, but at the north end of the county, Century, Walnut Hill, those areas, especially Century, I've heard them say they felt like they weren't represented by public safety in general up there. Would you mind touching on that, or?
Well, Escambia County is a big county.
Sure.
As you know, it takes you an hour to get to Century. And our beat structure is such that the calls for service is evaluated, and then we assign deputies, much like we did at the Pensacola Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
And every agency throughout the country
Sure.
does this way. If you have 100 calls for service a day in this location, you need to put a deputy there. If you have 1 call for service, you may be able to split 2 locations. So we do have deputies assigned to the north end. The north end, including Century, has their own precinct,
Mm-hmm.
because it just takes too long for us to dispatch someone from even Cantonment all the way to
Right.
Century. So they have their own precinct. But I do understand what we're talking about, and I'm a fan of having, again, this engagement with our various neighborhoods. So I'm a fan of opening more precincts, not just in Century, but maybe Walnut Hill and in Cantonment. I'd love to see a precinct in Beulah because of the growth that's taking place in Beulah. We have had one in Perdido, and I would look into potentially opening that one back up. And then we have one in Pensacola Beach, we have one in Warrington, and we obviously have the main station on Leonard Street in addition to the Inslee station. So we do have some precincts. I would look at the possibility in working with the Board of County Commissioners to say, let's open this precinct up. This neighborhood's important.
Mm-hmm.
So important. I would like a lieutenant, I would like a support staff person to be there so that people don't have to go all the way downtown.
Right.
And they know who to contact when they have issues in their various neighborhoods. And I learned that from the Pensacola Police Department as a police chief. We had some cadets assigned to Pensacola Village and to Addicts Court, and they knew who they could go to start to filter that information through to the various investigators or support staff or command staff.
Right.
So yeah, I think we can take a look at the county as a whole, and I think we can have some discussions about opening some precincts and hopefully reducing the response time for those calls for service.
And that's really kind of tying in with your community engagement program. Right.
Absolutely. And they all come together. We have neighborhood watches, and let's supplement those with precincts or substations. Let's supplement those with town hall meetings. Let's supplement those with citizens law enforcement academies and have safety in a place of worship where you can come to the sheriff's office. So if you can do all of that, there will be a number of opportunities to engage with your sheriff's office. And I look to incorporate those with other service providers, whether it is EMS or code enforcement or even the Board of County Commission if they want to get involved in that sort of thing. I think we can do better, and we will do better.
So I have 2 kind of current affairs kind of cases that are certainly in the national spotlight. One of those is the George Floyd case.
Right.
Would you mind kind of speaking on that, or?
I've been pretty clear on my thoughts in law enforcement. I chose law enforcement as a profession because I felt like we can do right by our community and we can serve our community. There are times, however, when you look at something and you're horrified by it.
Sure.
It is an embarrassment. It is a black eye to the law enforcement profession itself, because when I watch it, I just can't believe, I find myself wishing that someone would have grabbed him and pulled him off. There's no reason for that. You don't realize how long 8 minutes is until you watch a
Right,
video,
right.
and you're hoping for something else to happen, and what you see, you just can't believe, and that's what I felt like with regards to that. We obviously, it's outside of any expectation that any law enforcement officer would have. I feel like it is outside of the policy. I feel like it's outside of the law, and I think that again, I agree with the termination and bringing charges against those that were involved in an incident, because that is not our expectation. We talked about reasonableness. That is nowhere near reasonable. There are a number of different things, and I've been in situations where we've arrested people that they've resisted, and once you get that compliance, you stop.
Right,
Put them
right.
in the car, sit them up. You can, most of the time I found that you can actually have a conversation with them,
Sure.
and,
Yeah.
and you can have a human to human conversation with them and say, how that was a bad deal here. Why would you do that? And usually they'll tell you they've had a bad day or something like that, or they were just trying to get away. But watching that Floyd thing, I think that is seared in the brain of every
Yeah.
legitimate law enforcement officer in the country.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I felt like at that moment, the entire country kind of focused on the same thing, saying, I can't believe this.
Right.
Know? And I read that he was a field training officer after the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so the other case that, hasn't gotten the same amount of attention, but it's a pretty big case, and it's the case Breonna Taylor. She's in Louisville, Kentucky. And the case basically balanced around a probable cause search warrant where she directly wasn't tied into it, but kind of the company that she knew kind of tied her into this. And so the police department served a search warrant, and there's questions about if they did or they didn't. But at the end of the day, the judge signed off on a warrant of, it was a no announce or a no knock type search warrant for the residents. And that's caused, even up in Congress, them speaking on no knock type search warrants. Can you address that? Have you had experience with those?
We have. I've done well over 100 search warrants,
Mm-hmm.
and probably 2 have been no-knock search warrants. The majority of the time, what you do is you get a search warrant. You apply for a search warrant, and a judge will order you to search this given place that is within this time period, and you're looking for these specific items. That's what a search warrant is, and then you have what they call a return. So everything that you gather from that search warrant, you write down, document, and you take it as evidence. Leave that with a person. Most of them require you, in fact, all of them require you to knock and announce that it's the sheriff's office or police department for their own safety, so people
Right.
understand. There are times when the person that you're doing a search warrant on is so dangerous. They have proven, and you can articulate the danger that you have, whether it's weaponry, booby traps, cameras, and that sort of thing. And then you apply for what you refer to as a no-knock warrant. And this results in extreme judicial scrutiny. They look at that and say, not only do you have probable cause to make a search warrant, but in addition to, and more importantly in many cases, I'm also going to grant you the opportunity to not knock and announce because of it's so dangerous. You've convinced me as a judge or judicial authority, it's so dangerous that you don't need to do that. Now they're very, very rare.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, almost you can go years without doing a single one, fortunately. Now, search warrants are always dangerous.
Sure.
You're not going to announce, and if someone has a gun, then they can obviously shoot with you. That's why sometimes our SWAT team handles our search warrants. So my point in saying it is, this is a terribly tragic because she was not the target of the search warrant.
Right.
And it was a no knock, so that when they entered, no one knew who they were going in. That's my assumption of how this took place. So, and what you're saying is there's some people calling to end the no-knock search warrants. I'm not so sure if I'm ready to go there, but I would agree with the sentiment that you need to have even additional judicial scrutiny on these types of things. Because a lot of times what you'll do is you'll wait till someone leaves. You'll stop them outside of their home, and then you'll go back and do a seemingly safer environment to do that. And that's what we did for the most part. The only time we would apply for a no-knock search warrant is if there was an individual that has proven that he or she is willing to use their weapons, and they you have every reason to believe that they will do so.
Right.
So again, and they're very, very rare. You can go years without even applying for one.
Sure. Well, Chief, I thank you so much for addressing these topics. We've been, I guess, about an hour now or so, but I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. I wish you a lot of luck on your campaign, and please, try to stay safe in so many more ways nowadays than just being in law enforcement.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the
Absolutely.
opportunity to kind of give the citizens an opportunity to know who Chip Simmons is
Right.
and know where we're going and to know who to vote for.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Thank you, sir.